Goddard. I cannot believe I am recording a podcast with you. I also can't believe that I'm asking you the questions, because when we've met in the past, you've been asking me the questions. So I am enormously grateful to you for agreeing to be a guest. And you are a television presenter, an actress. You're best known for your hugely successful morning. Can you hear a background noise?
No, I can't. Was there a blip? I don't know where the blip came from, but I thought I heard a blip, but I can't otherwise hear any background noise.
Okay, I think it must be me. I think it was. Starting to start again. Trisha Goddard is a television presenter and actress, best known for her hugely successful morning talk show. And now you're a presenter of Talk TV. Is there anything else that you are that I don't know about, Trisha?
I'm also a special correspondent with CNN, so I work with Anderson Cooper and Wolf Blitzer and Don Lemon, which is wild.
Amazing.
It is,
Yeah.
it's very strange. And it's weird because and I'm sure we'll talk about this in our conversation. When I hear people talk, list what I've done in my career, it still comes as a surprise because and we'll talk about never feeling good enough and why and how that starts, I'm sure, Julia.
That is funny, isn't it? I mean, maybe it'll start with my first question, which is, what is the sort of greatest challenge you're facing or have faced that's sort of presenting that troubles you or is difficult for you?
I don't think, actually, funny enough, I don't think any of it. I think it's my happy place in the moment because I don't feel like I'm presenting. When I'm reading an auto cue or teleprompt or whatever they call it here, um, I'm reading that. So I've usually written it. So I'm just, and when I write things, I teach my producers to this, I say something out loud. I pretend I'm talking to a friend. And so, I mean, that's easy enough. When I'm talking to people, I love it. I'm so in the moment. I always say that I'm very, very fortunate to be doing something that's classified as a job when really it's a hobby. And it's a hobby that I started when I was 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
At my primary school in Virginia Water, I decided to start a newspaper.
Wow.
And it was in those days where we had a drum thing to print off everything. And I had to use mummy was trained as a typist, so her old typewriter, and it was bang, 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 bang. And I went and interviewed people. My first story was Virginia Water bridges falling down, and I
Oh my God.
interviewed an engineer because there were roadworks. And I remember my dad would complain when we had to stop and wait for the road works and what have you. So I did that interview, and then I got other kids to join in with the newspaper. And Mr. Bishop, the headmaster, was fantastic and encouraged me. So that was the first thing I started when I was 10, and I loved it. And after that, I started making little movies. On my dad had a Canon 8 movie camera that he'd bought when we were leaving East Africa to take film. So I started using that and making little movies and splicing them together. I was a runner-up in Young Film Director of the Year
Wow.
for the BBC, run by John Craven, who I've since met as an adult. Very funny story. And I won a splicing machine, which was fantastic. So I had my razor blade in the cement, and I made my little movies, and I recruited my stepdad and my half sisters and everybody else. And the second year, I was a runner up. And I went to, and I've still got the typewritten letters. I went to meet John Craven, and the other runner up with this was this kid in shorts who'd made plastic animals and animated them, which I thought was amazing because the patience of moving into every little thing. Anyway, that chap was Nick Parks, who went on to do Wallace and Gromit. And I remember
Wow.
we were at Buckingham Palace, we just met the Queen, and he came up to me and said, "I remember you. We were running us up on John Craven's news round." And I said, why were we runners up? Let's go and find him. He's here. So we marched off to find him. And we said, hello, Mr.
Hilarious.
Craven. We were runners up. And he went, oh, and we had to remind him what he remembered me, because I was the only young girl of color then. This is going back in the '70s, early '70s. And then, you know, and Nick said who he was. And we said, by the way, who won? And he went, I don't know. He said, exactly. We should have done.
You should have done.
So it's always been my hobby. And then one day my hobby became my career. So I'm very, very lucky indeed.
So it's, I mean, what I get from that is that talking to people, interviewing, kind of being out in the world is a completely natural fit from you.
Yes.
But from what I also understand from other parts of your life, that isn't true for you all the way through.
No, no. I mean, talking to strangers, I've always said, I have no problem. I did a concert for Nelson Mandela, and I remember I was fine.
Wow.
Well, I couldn't see anything, just the lights. When he first got out of prison, I worked with him, and somebody came up and said, there are 40,000 people in here. And I couldn't see, and I thought, I don't care. Sit me in a room face to face with one person, and
Like
I'll need a
this.
quick trip to the loo. This is all right because it's virtual, and because I feel I know you.
Yeah, we know each other.
Yeah. So I've always been okay with that. I've never, I don't like crowds. It's funny, I don't like crowds at all. But if I have a role and separation, and talking with people, I run a movie in my head of what they're telling me. I always see what people are telling me. And I'm very annoying to watch a film with or a series with, because I ask exactly the same questions or hear the same things. And I watch very vividly. I've learnt to watch hand movements, eye movements, and see if I automatically seem to feel if there's a synergy or a discord between them. I guess
You're kind of looking for danger, though, aren't you? You know, if there's if the words don't match the body language, then there's that, in some ways, a perceived threat, right? You're looking for.
Yes. From that, and also my big thing is betrayal, in big betrayal and little betrayals. So I'm looking, if you like, for almost subconsciously a betrayal between the voice and what I'm hearing and what everything else is doing. And it's funny, I can do that with strangers, but my God, I've missed some major red flags with people I know in relationships. And again, it's because certain, you know, and you did something on Instagram the other day, which I totally agree about, how we are different in different situations
With different people.
With different people. And when I have a very close vested interest in it, in that relationship, not with my children, but outside my children, I will often miss cues because I'm hoping for something else, something more, something better. I'm very much, sometimes I call myself an optimist to stupid degree. And that's led me into many problems in not seeing writing on the wall, which is, in my professional life, I'm in the complete opposite.
That's so fascinating, isn't it? I mean, there's this idea that we have different parts, like, as you said, and we have different versions of ourselves in different environments. And it's like you have your wise mind when you're working, but there's something like, I don't know what you'd call it, what part it is. Is it your child mind, or is it a kind of hopeful, blissful ignorance version of you that you don't want to see the flags? You can't bear to see the flags.
Yes.
Because it's too much.
It's too challenging. I mean, I also think it's a fear of, I know it's a fear of confrontation as well. And it's funny, I've covered that in therapy. But it was weird therapy. It's one that my ex-husband insisted I go to. Yeah.
And that face you're making makes me think that probably wasn't the best kind of therapy.
It wasn't the best kind of therapy. However, it did do me good when I was going through breast cancer. Not because we ever talked about breast cancer, but all the big stories about life and death, all of those things that come up with
Meaning.
that
Mm.
meaning. But my fear of confrontation was something. There were good and bad parts of it, but it wasn't my choice to go. But one thing I know why I have a fear of confrontation, and I've had to revisit that with my children and be very honest with them, because of course they've learnt from me, and that's fantastic, because they're adult children now. One of my
Two
children
daughters, haven't you?
two, well, one's a they them,
Mm.
two offspring, but Maddie, the younger one, is a mental health social worker, a specialist in mental health social working, and a family qualifying as a family therapist, and does lots of children's safeguarding and elderly safeguarding. And so between all of us, we've had the conversation, and we recognize our fear of confrontation, and we can talk about it. And I think that's probably been better than any therapy I have, because we've got one therapist in the family, and it's learned experience. But my dad, who I always believed to be my dad, and then when I had lots and lots and lots of questions, I always call it shamed, mad, bad, sad, all of those, um, uh, sort of having to keep me believing that was my dad. But
And he
he
wasn't, are you saying?
he wasn't. And I mean, when you see my sisters, they're lighter than my kids, my half sisters, and people say to me, how could you not know? Forgetting I was born in 1957, and England of the early 60s is not the England today. I mean, where I grew up in Virginia Water, I think I ever saw. I had a Sri Lankan teacher, which was a godsend in 1 year. And then there was one other black girl called Kathy, who was adopted from Africa, and everyone knew she was adopted from Africa. And I'd lived in East Africa, and but apart from that, no other people of color. You can imagine Virginia Water, Windsor,
I know.
and then nothing at all. So I didn't have other families to compare with. My mum was lighter than me, but Dad in East Africa, I mean, when we went out on the ship to East Africa, I think I was 5. I walked around the ship holding his hand, singing, "I want to be Daddy's girl." I mean, there was that hit Bobby's girl,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I was so close. And I remember when I was teased at school and bullied at school, really. Every time the teacher read Enid Blyton and talked about the naughty black gollies, the kids would come up and just smack me in the playground when I was
Trisha,
4.
that
Yeah,
is
just
so
smack me.
awful.
Just
You're
smack me.
joking.
Naughty golly, naughty golly, naughty golly. And so I went,
Proper racist abuse. I mean,
oh yes, I mean, and I went into, we used to have reading corner, and it was Noddy, and I had Noddy books, and a teacher would read the Noddy. And then when we got to the gollywogs, things changed. And
and the
I,
teacher never protected you.
oh no, God no, no, you'll have to toughen up. That's what I was told. But
Can I pause you 1 second? Is there a link between you fearing confrontation and these very early experiences of
okay.
physical racial abuse? I mean, is that a direct line?
Oh
Or
gosh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's such a thing as called racial shame. I learnt much later on,
yeah.
and I absolutely was. I never saw myself as any different, because I had a white dad. I had sisters in between. We were like the United Colours of Benetton. So I never
And a black
saw.
mum.
And a black mum. I never saw color. When I say I didn't see color, I thought that was everybody thinks that's
My
normal.
norm is the norm.
My norm, yes. So when we started reading, it started with Noddy, and I started school at 4, and I loved reading. I mean, I was reading by the time I got to school. I mean, reading has been my salvation,
You love
and
stories, don't you?
love stories, people stories, and reading. So these kids, anytime the gollywogs came up, they go come up to me, and I can remember their names. One was Jeffrey, this boy. Smack the naughty golly, smack the naughty golly.
Oh
So
my
I
God.
then used to, when she got out, I remember she'd pull out the book. I can see it. We sit on the
It's a
floor.
trauma memory, right? It's
Oh
absolutely
yes.
like live video in your body. It's
Oh God! But the cushion on the floor, she'd pull the book out from the bookcase and open it, and I used to think, oh, Chris, be like this.
sick
And
and
I knew
fear.
the book, I knew the story, I knew where the gollies were going to come. And it just came after Big Ears saying this. I knew, and these eyes would all look round at me. And then when it came to playtime, I was allergic to milk. And they couldn't understand why I was allergic, because many black people are. So I used to feel sick if I had milk. So I would drink my milk before I'd go out into the playground really, really quickly, drink it so I could say, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick. So I didn't have to go out there. But I remember this one boy, Jeffrey, one time he had an accident and he messed his trousers. And a lady used to take us home. One of the mums, I think, or grandmums, used to take a bunch of us and drop us off at each house on the way home. Because both my parents, my mum had 4 kids under the age of 4. You know, top.
Bang, bang, bang. Yeah.
And so this lady used to drop us off. So this particular time, this Jeffrey, who was the ringleader, I remember I said, Jeffrey pooed his pants all the way home. Right. I was so happy to have something on this ringleader. The next day, the teacher called me and said, you're going to sit in the naughty because you did this. This was dreadful, dreadful thing to do. And made me sit there, and everyone's, and I could not understand how
The inequality.
every day I was allowed to be smacked by 4, 5, 6 kids on and on and on. You can't play with us because you're the naughty golly. And yet I had once said this and I was in trouble. I couldn't understand. And that set a pattern actually in school. You know, Africa was fantastic, fantastic. There were kids from every nation, every country. And I got my love of just travel. I loved being in East Africa.
Because you had a better sense of belonging. But has that pattern of injustice, fear of unprovoked, totally nonsensical attack, and the kind of racial shame, that excruciating racial shame that brings up in you, is that, I mean, I can see it still in you now, but does it play out in your life now? Is it?
Well, Julia, that wasn't, I mean, that wasn't even there were worse examples. When we came back from Africa, we went to a small school in Norfolk, and I sensed that my parents were
Your mum really chose white places, didn't she? Oh my God.
Well, no, that was Dad, because Dad's family was from Norfolk, you see, and he's actually in a home in Norfolk now. But so we came back to Norfolk, where all my aunts and uncles were and everything else, when we came back from Africa. And then, thank God, after a few months, we moved to Virginia Water. Anyway, we went to school. Now, Africa, we were from 5 years old to 17 years old in the same classroom. Every country, I did Latin, I did French, I did Swahili, I played the piano. The teachers didn't care. They were missionaries from New Zealand. They didn't care where you were from. They were Dutch, German, and we learnt words from everyone, and the world was one. It was,
and difference was cohesive and allowed with a sense of belonging, rather than as something to beat you with, to separate you.
Oh yes, and everyone was there. All our parents had come, either missionaries or mental health nurses or doctors, to help.
And your mum was a nurse.
My mum was a nurse. Dad was a nurse as well, mental health nurse. He was helping run 2 of the big mental health institutions. Mum went back to secretarial work so she could drop us at school. But everyone, the expat community, were all there for a common purpose. They all had a belief, the Peace Corps, in getting an African nation on its feet. So there was a really great camaraderie.
Purpose, yeah.
Real purpose and camaraderie, and wild. You know, our brownies, we had to learn with ribbons to tie snake bites. We always had ribbons in our hair. My little sister did get a snake bite, and I knew what to do: crank up the telephone. And so, you know, it's making fires with sticks. So then adventure and wild. If you fell over, who didn't care? You know, snakes and the wonder of taking snake skins to school, and the baboons behind the house, and driving, and the deer jumping over, and the camping in what it was. As a child, it was wild and free and adventurous and no rules, and we just explored. We learned how to tell how Mahindi corn was ripe and throw it in the fire, and you know, all of these things.
You
Then you
sound
come,
so excited.
oh, I
It's
loved it.
it's so in the same way as I could feel that kind of excruciating shriveling when you talked about your school in when you were 4, to this expansion, to this
Oh,
aliveness, the richness, the vibrancy, the freedom, and wild. You say wild in the best possible way, that you can be anyone,
yes.
do anything, freedom.
Yes, and there was no differentiation. There was no politics behind it. But whether you're a girl or whether you're a boy, whether you were a man or a woman, you were there to get this nation on its feet. All hands to the pump, you know. So girls would climb trees, boys would do, you know, they weren't the boys going off and the girls. So I went from that to a small village in Norfolk.
Oh my goodness.
So I go to school, and of course we could read. I would have been 9. Our reading was off the scale because we'd have 17-year-olds, and you know, had a basic of Latin. I was playing, you know, basic Mozart on the piano. I could speak French. I could speak Swahili, and here I was with kids back to literally Janet and John. You know, early thing. So of course I was seen. The teacher always got me to stand up. I remember Stig of the Dump. I hated that
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
Get up, and Jack London's White Fang. But get up, read these books, and of course, anyway, the bullying was awful. I had a white cousin at that school, Amanda, and she would walk with myself and my next sister down to school. My aunt, my 2 little sisters would go to another school. So as we were walking towards this school, we used to hear the N word chanted. Uh, 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 uh. Then when we got to school, and I don't blame her now, I don't blame her for giving her my white cousin. She knew what was good for her. She would peel off,
Leave
and my
you.
sister and I would walk through the gate, and they'd form 2 lines and punch and hit. And the teachers would stand and watch. Punch the N. There was this one girl called Julie with long blonde hair who came from London, and I've always wished I could track her down again. She
Yeah.
used to go,
And tell her
I'll
what
fight.
for.
No, this girl would say, I'll fight with you, Trish. I'll fight with you, Trish. And she would cross the lines and come and stand with her back to me. So, punch, Trish, get him, get him, get him. I
Oh,
thought,
she was beside you.
she was, and I thought, why are you doing this? My cousin would run off,
Scarpered.
scarpered, and she always came. She'd run down the road. I've come to join you. Boo, boo, boo. Come on, Trish, we'll fight them back. And every morning this girl did this. And you think at that age, 9, to go against all of these people. Anyway, just to
But is
quickly.
that, can I ask you something though? Because I remember I've sort of been listening to you on other interviews, and when you had cancer, there was one nurse, Elaine, who saved you. No,
When I had my breakdown. When I
when
had
you
my
had,
breakdown.
sorry, when you
Yeah,
had your breakdown, there was one nurse that saved
yeah,
you,
Elaine.
which was Elaine. And is that a pattern, so that
Yes.
you experience kind of unbearable brutality, sometimes racism, sometimes other horrendous things have happened to you, and the thing that has saved you is maybe just one warm, loving, kind person?
Yes. Yes. And I've learned to look for that. I've learned to almost interview for that. I mean, but you have to be. I've also learnt to be wary. Just to quickly come back and finish that school
Yeah,
story.
sorry, yeah.
I was going into the canteen one day, school. You know, when we used to get school lunches, and I got my tray and I was coming back to my table. Honestly, Julia, it was, I can't tell you. The bullying just was awful. The whole school. They locked my sister in a classroom once because she'd been showing off because she was reading. And I remember, I thought it was a nightmare, my nails crawling up the wall to look through the bar and say, Julie, I'm here, I'm here. And she couldn't hear me and bang on the windows. Then she told me, yes, I remember that. Anyway, so I'm in the canteen with my tray. I'm going to sit next to my cousin. And one of the boys got his fist and went bang. And the tray went up in the air and the food went everywhere. The whole place erupts into laughter. I was so embarrassed. So I'm picking the food up and everything. And I go, but it's an absolute mess. So I join the queue. My face is
Head
burning.
down.
get to the queue and everyone's laughing. And I said to the dinner lady, "Excuse me, miss, my food fell on the floor." And I never forget, she said, you've had, you've had." And everyone started laughing again. And I just couldn't stand it, Julia. I just burst into tears. I ran out. I was sobbing and sobbing. I sat on the step outside. I was like crying. And this teacher came and sat next to me. Very white blonde hair, like a rabbit. He had big, very goofy teeth. And he sat down and he basically said to me, "You're going to have to toughen up. You have to understand we don't want people like
Oh
you
my,
in this country. And I know it's not your fault that you're here, but you have to understand that, you know, you're not, people don't want people like you in this country, and so it's going to be tough. So you're going to have to learn to live with that. This is going to be your life. You're going to have to toughen up and deal with it." I have never forgotten that. How do you sit? And as an adult, I've looked at 9 year olds. How do you sit and say that to a child? He was our
in that sort
teacher.
of reasonable voice, like you just, this
Very
is a
real.
fact of look, this is a
Yes,
fact of life. Like it's not your
you're not
fault,
wanted.
but
You're
you're
not
not
wanted.
wanted. You don't belong.
You
Get
don't
over
belong.
it. Get over it.
Get over it.
Toughen
Move
up.
on. Yeah, it's up to you to toughen up. Never, never stop those children punching or kicking. They used to run up and just kick me like that. In Brownies, I thought that was my safe haven. And then the teacher said, "Tell us what you learnt in Brownies." And I was so excited. I said, "Well, miss, we had to do a ribbon like this, da, 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 and we had to do," and people going, "Snakes, ooga, 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 ooga." And so I just shut down again. You know, that was awful. Then, as I said, we came to Virginia Water, we walked into our first classroom, and there was a brown teacher. I went, "Ah!" He was from Sri Lanka, and there were twins from Norway, Moluccans, Joachim, and his brother, and they were brown because they were all airline staff there. So St Anne's in Virginia Water, money was the common denominator, and they didn't care what color you were. There weren't many of us, but there were others, and that was like, oh, you know,
So you were safe again. You weren't
safe
the odd
again.
one out.
I wasn't the odd one out. And all the way through, I loved St Anne's. I love Willie Perks. I mean, I won a place to a very prestigious school, Willie Perkins. I loved those schools. I loved
And
learning.
grateful to them, you sound.
Grateful, really grateful. The headmistress obviously realised, Miss Sames, the first headmistress, I was different, and she'd call me in every lunchtime, and because she said, "You don't seem to be tolerating the milk, so come to my office and we'll have hot chocolate. But every time you come to my office, you need to come with a subject to discuss, something in the news, something."
That's
And that's from
kindness.
12. So I'd be like, and that she absolutely saw my love of news, and I had to tell her what was going on. All right, Miss Goddard, catch me up to what's going on in the world. And I just thought that was great with my hot chocolate. Yeah, sitting with
But
headmistress.
what I'm interested, so you've had an incredibly successful career from such devastating beginnings. I mean, I imagine that your mum and dad, although he wasn't your biological dad, he loved you like you were his child, and your sisters, that gave you a basis of secure love that protected you in some
No,
way.
no,
No.
not my parents, not my parents, because dad, unfortunately, from being daddy's girl, and he's kind of admitted to that. When we came back to England, it changed.
What
He was
happened?
very he was very violent. He started,
Oh my gosh.
and he said they worked so hard. My parents were both doing double shifts, and people were saying, "You're making excuses," and what have you. But he said, "I wish I'd spent more time with my family." It flipped, Julia. It flipped like that. And when a fully grown male it's funny, Billy and I, my older daughter and I, did a show where I took her back to that house in Strood Road, Virginia Water. And when I saw that corner where dad would get me, I literally almost threw up. I said, "Billy,"
It's
and
trauma, another
trauma.
trauma.
He would punch and hit me, and he'd call me
Oh,
bastard
Trish.
child, bastard child. I was a bastard child.
But you didn't
And
know
I
it
knew
then.
I was, well, my sisters used to say, "You're adopted, you're adopted." That house is so tiny. When I took Billy there, she was like, "Oh," and my parents were both working two jobs. There was a lot of pressure, a lot of stuff going on, I think, in their own marriage. Dad was very aggressive and violent. Mum wasn't. But mum, celebrated my academic. She was very proud of the school I went to. I felt I was celebrated for what I did
Your
and not
performance.
not who I was. I was too loud. I had too much energy. I was a show off. I wanted to be accepted and loved. I mean, my sisters went to ice skating and had elocution lessons, had all these extra classes, which they probably needed because they were in a comprehensive school and had various degrees of learning difficulties, not huge ones. Well, my younger sister, my late sister did, and she developed schizophrenia quite earlier on. But
And she died, hasn't she?
she
She's died.
died. She took her life when she was 27.
Oh,
But
Trisha.
everybody, it was noise, Julian, noise and confrontation. Another sister of mine was displaying early signs of mental illness, which, it was noise, chaos. I was given a special room to do my piano practice in the front room, and I think there was a lot of jealousy because I was mum's kid because I was the bright one, and the other three were seen as dad's kids. And the fighting, Julie, the fighting and the noise and the chaos, and I didn't know when I was going to be hit because it could come out of nowhere. We could be having Sunday dinner. My dad would roll up a paper and just go bap on your head and go, "What's that for?" He said, "Nothing, just to show you I'm in charge." I didn't. It changed. It changed, and I got out. I mean, I left home and left school. I was a year younger than everybody anyway. But I left school. When I look at my kids, I like, well, about 2 or 3 weeks after my 17th birthday, I had to
Wow.
get out. I had so many issues. I wouldn't stand on the fourth stair. I had obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, I had eating issues, which dad, and they're mental health nurses, dad, as I call him, my stepdad,
Mm.
saw. He said, "We've got a patient at us." There was this gorgeous girl with long hair at my school, and her hair started falling out, and she stopped coming to school. And she was a patient at my dad's at Holloway Sanatorium. And he said, "I can see what's happening. I'm going to drive and pick you up and drop you off at school if this doesn't stop." But I just hid it. I'd have a biscuit, rich tea biscuit in the morning with a nip of sherry, where my parents didn't do it
Trisha.
for Christmas. And that was it. I had so many issues, but I knew staying in that house any longer. It sounds dramatic, but I knew
Uh,
I
But
couldn't
you have good
survive.
instincts. I mean, it's what sounds terrifying is the unpredictability, and in the place where you're meant to be your most safe and most loved, whereas where you were in danger. So it's like school earlier, and then you find a safe place at school, but then you had a very dangerous place at home.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
picture that is emerging for me of you is that you're kind of clever, professional, performative self, you could switch on and worked incredibly well for you and
Mm,
enabled you to fight for this incredible career in all of these different ways in Australia, here,
mm,
big talk show here in the UK, and still incredibly successful. And that the most private, personal you is still present in you, although I want to know kind of, and you had difficult relationships with three previous husbands. I think one was quite good and the other two were terrible,
mm.
as far, I mean, to put it simplistically.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think they're all pretty bad.
Oh, were
Anyway.
they? One lasted longer.
One lasted 20 years,
Yeah.
yes. One lasted 20 years, and I think that was um, one of the failings of that was my recovering from breast cancer, and that's kind of what opened my eyes to the controlling nature of it. So yeah, so
So kind of I can understand the roots of difficulty to trust
mm,
and this idea of not seeing red flags when you're working, but somehow kind of longing to be okay and longing to be safe overcomes good instincts. And so you chose badly.
yes, yes.
What have you, it feels like now in your mid 60s, you've learned,
Yes,
you've
at
like,
last.
and what is it that you've learned and how come you're learning now?
Do you know, my greatest learning has come from and happily it happened both times, my adult children and Black Lives Matter. A lot of things that I put down to my failings, because I believed, from that little girl who got smacked because of naughty gollies to the teachers there, I hadn't even processed it in my mind, Julia, but I blamed myself.
Internalized racism.
I blame myself. I remember brushing my natural hair once and my dad saying, "Oh, it sounds like a horse eating hay when you brush your hair." And I never brushed my hair in front of everyone else. My mum was a generation where they hot combed your hair so it was straight and you could never go out in the rain. I was terrified of the rain. Now I love running in the rain.
Hooray. Good.
Yes.
Good.
But not even, and that wasn't because they were bad. They were a product of their generation
and their own racism. I mean,
yes,
they had received racism.
They'd received, because black and white living together, I mean, you know, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, all that sort of thing. So you know, I blame myself. I really, really did. And I never saw my color until someone pointed it out to me. When I was the first, I didn't realize I was the first black person on Australian television until journalists came and said, "What does it feel like to be the first black journalist first black person we've had on television?" And I remember I went jokingly, which did not translate, "Me, black? Oh yes." You know, it doesn't translate in print, trust me. But
so in some way you had, although you've been bullied and beaten and kind of really traumatized by being black, somehow you hadn't let yourself know fully that you were black.
I never saw myself as black. I saw myself just as a Trisha.
As Trisha.
Yeah, and then Black Lives Mattered, and so much stuff came out of that. Other people talking about the things that I'd internalized that I could recognize, and my kids saying, "Mummy, you know, you're like that." And they'd gone through it in Norfolk, because I'd gone back to live in Norfolk. That's where I'd been headhunted too. And I always believe, because I do have a deep faith, I'd always believe, hey, you've been brought back to face your demons now. Come on, you can stop running, you're here, do something with it. So my kids recognized that, and I recognized it in them when one of them was called Afro Bitch at school, and Billy was quite proud of it. I went, whoa, 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 whoa. So they pointed out things to me, and I read about things that I thought was me not being able to do it, because there is that kind of
so
thing
you could
lighten up, it's a joke, can't you take a joke? And there's thousands of people saying that their lives have been traumatized and they've not been able to speak about it, because when they did, there was the teacher who told them to toughen up, or somebody said,
so you saw yourself what happened to you, which had felt personal, and there was something wrong with you. You recognize finally that this was racism and what racism looked and, more importantly, felt like.
Yes.
And you recognized those awful stories were not just you. It wasn't about you failing or not being good enough or something wrong with you, but this was to do with racism and the color of your skin.
Yes. And it's the little things, like people always wanting to
micro
touch hair and all those microaggressions. So I learned that. And also the other thing that happened is when my last marriage was breaking down, it took a long time to break down. It was awful, awful, awful. And I didn't tell my kids, but they could see me shrinking. I mean, Julia, I went down to, I've got clothes and I've kept couple of them 000. For me, I'm 5'6", and I went down to 8 stone. And I thought I looked great, but I kept falling over. I had injuries. I was working out obsessively. I was drinking, and it didn't take a lot of alcohol, because, you know, a tiny bit of alcohol. And I was having all sorts of issues, and I couldn't work for 3 years. I was working on and off, but I just was so consumed at that stage. My ex-husband was like, I love you, I want you back. No, I hate you, I love you, I want you back. Yeah, no, having this affairs and all this sort of thing, and on, and I can't live without you, I can't live without her, and all this thing. And I didn't tell my kids, and they saw it going on. So when it finally came, and I realized, to be safe, I didn't tell him, and because it was an Australian divorce, I could do it online. And I rang him up, and I was putting on this nice face, and I said, by the way, divorce papers are coming tomorrow. If you're not at your home, they will go to your office. So it'll be at 10 o'clock. They're going to, and he started crying,
Shocked.
shock, and I said, what? How are you shocked? I never thought this day would come. And I thought, light bulb. And anyway, once I'd done that and I told my kids, they were angry, more angry with me for not, hindsight,
Not trusting them and
saying
telling
it,
them.
not
Yeah.
telling them, because they were adults there. And then they went through, because there were all sorts of issues between him and them as well. And there was this absolute, Billy would ring and scream we were screaming and shouting and crying and laughing. There were these conversations where I'd say, Billy, I love you, but I cannot deal with this. And we were all trying to look after our mental health, each other's mental health. It was a mess, Julia. It was a mess for which I'm forever grateful, because we all got real. We all stopped playing.
Honesty.
All stopped playing the part of mummy knows best. Maddie the peacemaker, where Maddie's always in the middle and doesn't have a voice. Billy as the disruptor and what have you. We all had our roles, and we stuck to them rigidly at first, and then we just started saying it how it was.
Real truth.
Real truth.
The kind of breakdown of the facades or the roles enabled you to connect and love each other. So is the lesson that honesty, that truth, however difficulty it is better than fake, better than some kind of armor. That with the people you love most, you have to be most honest.
And I didn't care that it came about that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was horribly painful at the time.
Terrible, yeah.
But
someone who doesn't like conflict, it must have been awful.
And we all said we don't like conflict. And guess what? And then we saw that conflict constructively, where you said to someone, you know what, darling, I'm going to give you space, and we learned to navigate that. And we learned we all said we hate conflict. Out of that now, we can have those conversations without that heat. Billy went into recovery, and her strength in going into recovery helped all of us realize. Maddie, in her work, has to see a therapist every week. So Maddie had somewhere else to go. And for me, I sort of navigated through that by, I think I'd done enough therapy. And also they were we really, really talk. Now it's so different. We became so
loving,
close. Oh my God, so close. I mean, I don't see them as much face to face, but we FaceTime. I've always been one for that, Julie. When they were at uni, I'd send stupid jokes and they'd go, oh my God, mother. So I know they were alive. We've always been in contact. So we FaceTime, we text, we do so much. We have, so
you stay. I mean, we've only got about 5 minutes left. I can't believe we've nearly come to the end. That's gone so crazy fast. So in my terms, you've learned to fight productively by being honest, and you repair after the fight.
Yes.
And so you've allowed differences, and you've kept the love and connection alive rather than being distanced by pretending and faking it for each other in a way of protecting each other, in a way distanced you.
Yes.
Absolutely. So can we end, although I want to go on forever, with, it feels like love is what is saving you now. I mean, I know you've had a lot of health problems, your hip, and we've only got a few minutes. So having had these devastating relationships, really, and such external success, it feels finally you've come home in your body, in your relationship, to a place of safety. Is that right?
Very true. I decided that was it. If I never met anybody else before, because I've never had to be in a relationship, I've kind of almost been, especially with my ex-husband, I was kind of
the big earner.
I've always been the earner, and I was preyed upon. Sounds a bit dramatic, but I think if you're a deer with a broken hoof, there's certain animals that will see you as, but so I said, that's it. If I never meet somebody else, it's fine. Once I'd got out of that state and I started going back to work, and I thought,
Got yourself steady.
got myself steady. I don't have to be in a relationship. But I did say yes to everything a girlfriend invited me to, purely because I thought, like many older people, my friendship base was shrinking and I wanted to increase that. So I went to the most mad things. So I went to a horse riding ball at a very, very, very posh Greenwich establishment. There was one other black person there and the singer, and which I didn't care about. And I didn't wear a ball gown. I got it completely wrong. I wore this mad outfit. I love clothes and sequin harem pants. And I was sat next to this chap. And my girlfriend had set him up with, in that wonderful Jewish way, with somebody on the opposite end of the table. And I was listening to this woman talk, and I was listening to this chap talk, and I thought it was hilarious. So I nudged him and I said, just giving you the heads up, in some mad world, Susan thinks that you would be good with that lady over there. She's got a horse farm in Maine, and this is very urbane chap sitting there. And I was just laughing, and we just laughed and laughed and laughed. Long story short, eventually he was a friend of a very, very good friend. So, he gave me a lift home, and I said to this friend, if he kills me, I will come back and haunt you. He didn't. He got me home. And a few dates in, I thought, you know what? I'm not doing this again. I wrote this list of questions, Julia. I think it was 25 questions, real questions. I thought, if you could go back into your future relationships, what would you have wanted to know right from the word go that you didn't and you discovered awfully? And I said to him, before we go any further with this, I've got some questions. And I went,
gosh, I'd like to see a list of those questions.
Well, he said to me, what happens if I don't want to answer one? And I said, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That says something about that itself. And it was like, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you? What's this? And one of the things we clicked very early on, I heard in his voice, he said something. And he said, I'm just divorced, and I'm a widower. And I looked at him and I said, did your first wife have breast cancer? And he said, how did you know? I don't ask me how, but he had nursed and stayed with her all the way through. And he understood me. He'd say things like later on, oh, shouldn't you wear your pressure garment, your precious sleep? I mean, things that I'd been kind of embarrassed to have before. Wasn't embarrassed by scarring, things like that. But anyway, I gave him this questionnaire, went through all these questions. It was the best thing I did, because there were no right or wrong answers.
No.
It was like, how do you feel about your spirituality? How would you describe that? And he said, can I ask you questions? I said, no. But but it was the best thing absolutely best thing I did. And it's held true. He was
honest. So there's again that honesty. So if I can't bear that we're ending, it feels like we've only just begun. But if there is one lesson that you want other people to protect themselves earlier than you did, that it took you a bit too long. I mean, you can't regret these things, but
no.
Would it be to ask for the truth, see the truth, and tell the truth, something like that?
Definitely, definitely there's nothing to be lost by asking. When I follow my gut instinct, my absolute intuition, my gut instinct, it's successful. We are animals at core. Yes. It's what I use in my work. We are animals at core. Your smell, that's what, when I choose to ignore those because of some airy fairy dream,
some story you're telling yourself,
something like that, always to one's detriment. Go with if you feel something is wrong in your core, it is wrong. No matter what they're saying, they can bring flowers. It is wrong. Run.
That is a marvelous way to end. Thank you so much, Trisha. If it feels wrong and in your core it's wrong, it is wrong.